Woman shocked to learn her parents and sister took a vacation on the day of her husband and son's funeral. Then she decides to do this. Helen had always been resilient. From an early age, she learned not to expect much from her parents. She grew up in a traditional family, but was always sidelined. Her sister was the favorite, the one who received attention, compliments, and frequent visits. Helen, on the other hand, was only remembered when it was convenient. When she called her parents, they rarely answered. If she needed support, she got cold excuses or silence. But she didn't let that define her. Instead of dwelling on the rejection, she built her own family, surrounding herself with the love she never had as a child. Her husband, Jerry, and her son, Jacob, were everything to her. Together, they formed an inseparable trio, overcoming life's challenges with affection and companionship. For Helen, the love they shared was unshakable, and no matter what happened, she knew they would always be by each other's side, because that's how she had always been with those she loved. That morning, Helen woke up before the alarm went off. The room was still immersed in dim light, but she could already feel the excitement pulse in her chest. It was the day of the trip. A day that had been planned for months, carefully organized so everything would be perfect. A much-needed break from the routine, precious time to enjoy with Jerry and Jacob, far from the worries of everyday life. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to Jerry's peaceful breathing beside her. In just a few moments, that morning's silence would be replaced by the tireless energy of Jacob, who without a doubt would already be running around the house, anxious to leave. And it didn't take long for that to happen. Mommy, are we going yet? Is it time?" Jacob said, bursting into the room and jumping onto the bed with contagious excitement. "Calm down, sweetheart. We still need to finish packing," Helen said, laughing and trying to move her son's small feet away from her as he tried to pull her out of bed. "But I'm ready. I packed everything yesterday. Look," Jacob said, pointing to the door where his little suitcase was already placed. Jerry turned in bed, still sleepy, rubbing his eyes before laughing at his son's enthusiasm. "Aren't you going to have breakfast, champ? It's a long trip," Jerry said, pulling the boy into a quick hug before sitting him down beside him. "Later. First, we have to leave right away," Jacob said, unable to contain his excitement. Helen shook her head, amused by her son's impatience. She got up and went to the closet to grab the last clothes she needed to pack. Jerry did the same, while Jacob ran back and forth as if trying to rush them with his pure energy. The kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread, and despite his impatience, Jacob finally sat down at the table with his parents. The trip was the only topic dominating their conversation. "Dad, do you think we'll see any wild animals?" Jacob asked, taking a bite of bread. "It depends, kid." "Did you bring your binoculars?" Jerry asked, raising an eyebrow playfully. "Yes, and the camera too. I want to take lots of pictures," Jacob said, full of excitement. Helen smiled, watching the scene unfold before her. Little moments like that were precious, and she knew it. They formed her real family. That trip meant much more than just a few days of rest. It was about being together, creating new memories, and strengthening the bonds that held them together. When the bags were finally in the car and everything was ready for departure, Jacob could no longer sit still. He was bouncing from one side to another, repeating over and over how excited he was. "So, are we ready to go?" Jerry said, starting the car and looking at Helen with a smile. "Let's go," she said, holding her husband's hand for a brief moment before he accelerated the car out of the garage. The road was long, but the trip was filled with lively conversations. Helen and Jerry talked about the places they would visit, the food they would try, the pictures they would take. Jacob intervened at every moment, asking questions, making up stories, and ensuring that no one remained silent for too long. The car was full of laughter, life, and plans, but then everything changed. In the middle of the trip, Jerry furrowed his brow as he saw a truck ahead coming in the opposite direction. It was going too fast. fast enough to seem dangerous. "Helen, hold Jacob," Jerry said, his voice tense, instinctively gripping the steering wheel harder. "What's wrong?" Helen said, her heart racing at the sudden change in her husband's tone. Time seemed to slow down. The truck, out of control, crossed the lane. Jerry jerked the steering wheel to the left in a desperate reflex, but there was no time. The impact was brutal, a deafening crash, a flash, and then silence. Helen didn't know how much time passed until her eyes opened again. Everything around her was white. The ceiling, the walls, the smell of disinfectant was strong. She tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through her body, stopping her. Her head throbbed, and her vision was blurry. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know what had happened. Then, a voice sounded beside her. "Helen, can you hear me?" said a man in a white coat, looking at her with a concerned gaze. Where am I?" Helen said, her voice weak and trembling. "You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident. You were treated quickly, but fortunately you didn't have any serious injuries. Just a blow to the head," the doctor said, keeping his tone calm. Helen blinked a few times, trying to process the information. Her mind was slow, confused, but then a thought pierced her chest like a sharp blade. "My husband, my son, where are they?" she said, feeling her throat close as she spoke those words. The doctor hesitated. For a moment, Helen saw the truth reflected in his eyes before he even said anything. His silence was worse than any answer. "Doctor, where are they?" Helen said, her breathing starting to speed up. The man lowered his head before finally responding. "Helen, I'm so sorry. Your husband and son didn't survive the accident," he said, his voice heavy with sincere sorrow. The world stopped. The air disappeared. The room spun around her, as if time itself had shattered. "No, no, no, no!" Helen cried, her voice coming out in a strangled scream. She tried to get up, tried to deny it, tried to escape that cruel reality, but her body didn't obey her. The pain was unbearable, a pain that couldn't be measured, that couldn't be named. "This isn't true, you're wrong. They were with me, they were fine, I was there," Helen shouted, gripping the bedsheet as if she could anchor herself to the last hope that this was just a nightmare. The doctor said nothing more. He simply stood there, respecting the utter devastation that consumed her, and in that moment, Helen knew that everything she had ever loved had been torn away from her forever. The world around Helen lost all color, all sound that wasn't the echo of emptiness. The hospital discharged her the next day, but there was nowhere to go. Her house, once a refuge of love and joy, now felt like a mausoleum. The drive there was in complete silence, and when she finally crossed the door, the pain hit her with full force. Jacob's suitcase was still in the corner of the room, exactly where he had left it, eager to leave. The toys were scattered on the floor, as if he were about to run in and resume his games at any moment. Jerry's shoes were by the door, waiting to be worn, just like any other regular day. But nothing was regular anymore. Nothing would ever be. Helen slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, hugging her knees as a sob tore through her chest. The silence was deafening. There were no more voices filling the house, no more laughter, only absolute emptiness. The following days blurred into an indistinct haze. Grief consumed her like an insatiable monster. She cried until she had no more strength, until her body couldn't produce any more tears. She spent hours staring into nothingness, lost between memories and pain. When she managed to fall asleep, she woke up startled, with the distinct impression of hearing Jacob's voice calling her, but it was only her mind playing cruel tricks on her. In every corner of the house, a brutal reminder. Jerry's shirt thrown over the chair, Jacob's favorite toy by the couch, the marks of little feet on the wooden floor, dirty from the soil of the backyard where he loved to play. Every detail was an open wound. But even in her destruction, there were things that had to be done. The funeral had to be organized, and that simple thought made Helen's stomach churn. She shouldn't be picking out coffins. She should be picking out clothes for the trip. She shouldn't be choosing flowers for a wake. She should be helping Jacob pick out the best memories for his photo collection. But here she was, burying both of them. The phone rested on the table beside her, and Helen realized, with a chill down her spine, that she hadn't received any calls from her family since the accident. No messages, no words of comfort. Did they even know? Had anyone told them? She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Maybe they were waiting for her to call. Maybe they thought in the midst of the pain, she wouldn't remember to reach out. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the phone and dialed her mother's number. With each ring, her heart seemed to tighten further. "Hello?" came the voice on the other end, and Helen felt her chest tighten. "Mom," Helen said, feeling a lump in her throat. "Oh, Helen, hi," her mother said, her voice calm, with no trace of concern. Helen swallowed hard. "Did you hear what happened?" she asked, hoping for some sign of compassion. "Oh yes, your aunt mentioned something. Very sad," her mother said, with a lightness that made Helen's stomach drop. She remained silent for a moment, hoping her mother would continue, say something, ask how she was, show some reaction to what had happened. But nothing came. "Mom, the funeral is tomorrow," Helen said, her voice barely a whisper. On the other side of the line, silence stretched on. Then her mother sighed. "Helen, I really wish I could be there, but we're on vacation," her mother said without hesitation. Helen's mind stopped. "What?" she said, not believing what she had just heard. "Your dad, your sister, and I. We came to a resort this week. It was all booked. You know how these things are, honey. You can't cancel at the last minute," her mother explained as if she were explaining something obvious. Helen felt a chill run through her body. "You're on vacation," Helen said, her voice faltering. "Yes, dear, but we're so sorry for what happened. It's a tragedy. If you need anything, let us know when we get back," her mother said without any real weight in her words. The phone dropped from Helen's hands. It was as if a blade had pierced her chest. She knew her parents had never been close, but this was something else. Not even Jerry's death, which they had never accepted, justified this indifference. But Jacob, their grandson, how could they ignore his loss? Silence consumed her. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask for explanations. She just hung up the phone and sat there, staring at nothing. The truth had always been right before her, but now there was no ignoring it anymore. Her parents and sister had never truly been there. They had never been a refuge. They had never been a foundation. And now, when she needed them most, they had proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that they couldn't even be by her side in the face of death. Time passed, as it always does, indifferent to the pain, the mourning, and the wounds that seemed impossible to heal. The world kept spinning, and Helen somehow learned to move with it. The pain never went away. It just transformed, stopped being a scream, and became a silent weight she carried with her every day. She didn't seek revenge, didn't wish ill on anyone, but she also never forgave. There was no forgiving what was unforgivable. Life took her to another place, other routines, other people, another reality. The absence of Jerry and Jacob was always there, like a scar on her soul, but she learned to live with it. She stopped waiting for anything from the family that had once ignored her. She didn't seek them out, and they, predictably, never tried to seek her out either, not because they couldn't, but because they had never felt the need. To them, Helen had always been a smaller detail, a distant shadow of the daughter that truly mattered. And then, time, with its cruel irony, flipped the script. One morning the phone rang, and seeing the name on the screen, Helen felt a strange premonition. Her sister never called. She had never made the slightest effort to keep in touch. She answered on the third ring. "Helen!" came the voice on the other end, trembling. She didn't respond immediately. She just waited. "Helen, please listen to me," her sister said, now in a more desperate tone. Helen's silence was so firm that her sister felt the need to continue without Helen saying anything. "My husband left me. He took almost everything. Her sister's voice faltered. Helen remained expressionless. "I have nothing, Helen. Do you understand? I have no one. And now I understand. Now I know what it's like," her sister said, as if she had finally seen a reflection of her own negligence. Helen took a deep breath. Her sister's words didn't echo inside her like a triumph. There was no satisfaction, just an emptiness. "You need to help me. I have nowhere to go," her sister said, her voice choked. Helen closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the irony of it all. Years ago, if the roles had been reversed, if it had been her who was destroyed, abandoned, and without anyone, her sister wouldn't even have thought of offering help. And now she was there, begging. Helen waited a few seconds before responding. Her voice was calm, firm, without any emotion. "I'm really sorry," she said, and hung up. The phone dropped into silence, and she didn't feel anything except the certainty that she had made the only possible decision. Years later, fate took another turn. This time, it was her parents who sought her out. First came a short, almost casual message, then another, and then a call. Helen didn't answer right away. She let them try, let them insist, let them feel the same distance she had always felt from them. The phone rang again. For the third time that week. The same number, the same name on the screen. Helen watched the phone vibrating on the table, unhurried, unemotional. It wasn't a surprise. She knew that sooner or later they would seek her out, but not because they loved her, not because they cared. She let it ring until it almost went to voicemail. Then slowly, she slid her finger across the screen and answered. For a moment, all she heard was hesitant breathing on the other end. Then the voice came. "Helen, daughter, how are you?" her mother said, forcing a soft tone that sounded artificial, uncomfortable, as if she were trying to remember what it felt like to be kind to her. Helen leaned back on the couch, keeping the phone to her ear. "I'm fine," she said without any inflection. The silence on the other end stretched on, as if her mother was waiting for something more. Maybe a, "How are you?" Maybe a, "I've missed you." But Helen wouldn't give them what they had never given her. Her mother cleared her throat. "Sweetie, it's been so long, hasn't it?" she said, with a clumsy attempt at sounding nostalgic. Helen remained silent. "We've missed you," her mother said, but the words came out empty, without any real weight. Helen remained motionless, the phone firm between her fingers. Her mother waited for a response, but all she found was the emptiness on the other end of the line. The truth is, her mother hesitated for a few seconds. She took a deep breath before continuing. "Your father and we're getting old." Helen didn't react. "And your sister? Well, she's not doing well," her mother said in a tone almost regretful, as if she believed that this would affect Helen in some way. Her silence was an answer in itself. Her mother tried again, now changing tactics. "I know we've had our differences, but we're family, Helen. We need each other." Helen felt a pang of irony in those words. How many times had she herself said that in the past, when she still believed that family meant something beyond an empty word? How many times had she sought support and received only the echo of indifference? She crossed her legs, keeping her voice calm and controlled. "What do you want, Mom?" she said straightforward. Her mother was silent for a few seconds, then finally the truth came out. "Helen, we need you," she said with a sigh. And there it was, the real reason for that call. It wasn't about regret. It wasn't about love. It was about need. Helen felt nothing, no hatred, no pity, no satisfaction, just the certainty that she had made the right decision by moving on without them. "I understand," she said simply. On the other end of the line, her mother seemed to have lost patience with her coldness. "For God's sake, Helen, are you really going to hold a grudge forever? Are you going to treat us like strangers?" her mother said in an irritated tone, as if she were tired of that game. Helen closed her eyes for a moment and smiled, but it wasn't a smile of happiness. "Strangers?" she said slowly. "No, strangers would have treated me better." The silence on the other end was absolute. Her mother tried again, now in a lower tone, as if, for the first time, she was feeling the weight of it all. I know we were wrong," she said, her voice shaky. "But now we're alone, Helen. Your sister can't help us. Helen interrupted her, still keeping her voice serene. "I understand," she said slowly. Her mother seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Then, can we see each other?" she asked, hopeful. Helen didn't hesitate. "No," she said, and hung up. She placed the phone aside and sat there, motionless, feeling the weight of that conversation slowly dissipating. She didn't need to seek revenge. She didn't need to yell or throw in their faces everything they had done. She just showed them, in the cruelest and most silent way possible, what it was like to be discarded, what it was like to desperately need someone and find only emptiness. Years passed. Helen never sought them again, and after that last call, they never tried to contact her again either. She heard that after losing everything, her sister had moved to a small rented apartment, living a life very different from the one she was accustomed to. Her parents, already old and frail, tried to keep in touch with distant relatives, but no one wanted to take responsibility for them. The favorite daughter was no longer so perfect, and the only one who could have been a refuge for them was no longer willing to carry that burden. And Helen? Helen moved on with her life, made new friends, met people who respected her, who loved her for who she was. It took time, but she found a new reason to smile. She never forgot Jerry and Jacob. She would never forget them. But she learned to remember them without letting the pain destroy her. She lived, not with resentment, but with the certainty that for the first time, she was the one choosing who would be part of her life. And those who once ignored her now understood too late what it meant to be irrelevant. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.